You got fat. That was the first thing Tyler Brooks said to me after 8 months of silence. And somehow those 3 words landed harder than the winter wind cutting through downtown Chicago that afternoon. I was standing in line at a coffee shop I used to love, one hand wrapped around my purse strap, the other resting unconsciously over the gentle curve of my stomach, when I heard his laugh behind me, sharp and familiar, like a door slamming in a house I thought I'd finally moved out of. I turned before I could stop myself. He looked the same. Expensive haircut, gym-built confidence, that smirk he wore like it was part of his outfit. His eyes traveled slowly down my body and settled on my midsection. Wow, he added, loud enough for the barista and the woman beside me to hear. Guess breakups hit you hard. Heat flooded my face, but I didn't look away. 8 months ago, I would have apologized. I would have laughed it off, promised to get back to spin class, promised to be better. 8 months ago, I still believed love meant shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's expectations. Now I just breathed in slowly, the smell of espresso and caramel syrup mixing with the cold air every time the door opened. Careful what you say, Tyler. I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He raised an eyebrow, amused. What? It's just an observation. You used to care about how you looked. Used to. Like I was a project he'd abandoned. Conversations around us resumed in low murmurs, but I could feel the glances, the curiosity, the subtle judgment that always seems to follow a woman whose body changes in public. He leaned a little closer, lowering his voice, but not enough. You should have stuck with me, Em. I would have kept you motivated. Motivated. That was his word for control. For counting calories out loud at dinner. For telling me which dresses were flattering and which made me look soft. My fingers tightened slightly against my coat, but my other hand stayed protectively over my stomach. 6 months along. The doctor said the baby was healthy. Strong heartbeat. Strong everything. I hadn't told many people yet. Not because I was ashamed. Because some things felt sacred. Outside the large front windows, traffic crawled past in the late afternoon rush, gray skies hanging low over the city. Then a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, quiet and deliberate, the kind of vehicle that doesn't need to speed to command attention. I noticed it the way you notice a shift in temperature before a storm. Tyler followed my gaze and scoffed lightly. Don't tell me you've got some midlife crisis banker picking up the tab now. I almost smiled at that. If he only knew. The shop door opened again, a gust of cold air sweeping in, and the room seemed to pause for half a second. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't need to. I felt him before I saw him. The calm, controlled presence that never rushed, never raised its voice, never needed to prove anything. Tyler straightened subtly, confusion flickering across his face as footsteps approached from behind me. I kept my eyes on Tyler's, steady and unflinching for the first time in years. You really shouldn't comment on things you don't understand, I said softly. And this time, I wasn't talking about my weight. The air shifted before I even turned around. I felt it in the subtle straightening of Tyler's shoulders, in the way his smirk faltered just enough to betray confusion. The footsteps behind me were unhurried, measured, the soft echo of expensive leather against polished tile. I inhaled slowly, grounding myself in the scent of roasted coffee beans and vanilla syrup, and then he was there beside me. Adrian Romano did not touch me at first. He simply stopped close enough that I could feel the warmth of him at my back, close enough that the room seemed to recalibrate around his presence. He wore a charcoal overcoat tailored to perfection, dark hair brushed back neatly, expression composed in a way that never gave too much away. But his eyes, when they flicked briefly to my face, softened just a fraction before turning toward Tyler. Is there a problem here? His voice was calm, low, not loud enough to draw attention, yet somehow every nearby conversation dipped in volume. Tyler blinked, recognition dawning slowly. I watched the exact second it hit him. He had seen Adrian before. Everyone in this part of the city had, at least once. Charity galas, business headlines, real estate acquisitions, a name that carried weight without needing explanation. No, Tyler said quickly, attempting a casual laugh. We were just catching up. Old friends. Adrian's gaze did not leave his face. You seemed uncomfortable, he said, and although he was speaking about me, he did not look at me again. He did not need to. He already knew. Tyler shifted his stance. I was just joking around. She knows that. Right, Emily? I met Tyler's eyes, And for the first time since our breakup, I saw something different there. Not superiority. Not certainty. Something closer to calculation. I do not find comments about my body amusing, I said evenly. My hand rested over my stomach again, instinctive, protective. Adrian's attention dropped briefly to the movement. Not obvious. Just a flicker. But I felt it, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his posture angled slightly toward me, as if shielding without making a show of it. Tyler followed his gaze and gave a short scoff. What? Is that why you have been hiding? Because you let yourself go? The words sounded weaker this time, thinner. Adrian's expression did not change, but the temperature in the space between the three of us seemed to cool. You are mistaken, Adrian said quietly. She has not let anything go. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice, just certainty. Tyler crossed his arms. Look, man, this is between us. I dated her for 2 years. I think I know her. Adrian finally turned his head slightly toward me, not fully, just enough that I could see the edge of his profile. Do you? He asked, and this time the question was directed at Tyler, but the answer belonged to me. My heart beat steadily now, no longer racing. The fear I used to feel around Tyler had dissolved months ago, replaced by something stronger. Perspective. You knew the version of me that tried to earn your approval, I said. That version does not exist anymore. Tyler's jaw tightened. So what? You found someone richer. Adrian did not react to the insinuation. Instead, he stepped half a pace closer to me, still not touching, but undeniably aligned. What she found, he said calmly, was clarity. The barista called out an order number behind us, the mundane normalcy of it almost surreal. Tyler let out a breath through his nose. This is ridiculous. His gaze flicked once more to my stomach, then back to Adrian. Enjoy the upgrade. Adrian's eyes sharpened slightly, but his voice remained even. You should be careful with assumptions, he said, especially when they concern things that are not yours. The words hung in the air, deliberate and precise. Tyler looked like he wanted to respond, but something held him back. Maybe it was the quiet confidence. Maybe it was the realization that the dynamic had shifted in a way he did not understand. He muttered something under his breath and stepped aside, creating space between us as though he had suddenly remembered an appointment. Adrian waited until Tyler moved toward the door before finally turning fully to me. His gaze softened again, scanning my face, then lowering gently to where my hand rested. Are you all right? He asked, and there it was. Not dominance. Not possession. Concern. Real and steady. I nodded once. I am. He studied me for another moment, as if confirming the truth of that statement, then inclined his head slightly toward the entrance. Let us go home, he said quietly. And for the first time in a long time, that word felt like something solid beneath my feet. The cold air outside felt different from the coffee shop, sharper against my cheeks, more honest. Adrian opened the passenger door of the SUV himself, one hand steady on the frame, as if the simple gesture carried weight. He always did that, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he chose to. I eased into the seat carefully, the leather warm despite the February chill, and waited until he had circled to the driver's side before I exhaled fully. The door closed with a muted thud that sealed off the noise of the street, the distant honking, the hum of late afternoon traffic crawling at 20 miles per hour. Inside, it was quiet, controlled, safe. Adrian adjusted the heat slightly before starting the engine. He did not ask again if I was all right. He watched me instead, as if reading the subtle tension in my shoulders, the way my fingers still rested protectively over my stomach. He will not bother you again, he said calmly, eyes forward. It was not a threat. It was a statement of outcome. I shifted in my seat. You do not have to handle everything, I replied softly. I can manage Tyler. Adrian's jaw moved slightly, not in frustration, but in thought. I know you can, he said. After a moment. That does not mean you should have to. The SUV merged into traffic smoothly, the city skyline stretching ahead in muted winter colors. I watched pedestrians hurry along sidewalks in heavy coats, couples stepping around puddles left by melting snow, the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon. For most of them, life was predictable. Work, home, dinner, sleep. For me, the last 6 months had rewritten everything. I leaned my head back against the seat. He thinks I ruined myself, I admitted quietly. Adrian glanced at me briefly. Do you? The question was simple, but it landed deeper than anything Tyler had said. I let the silence stretch as we stopped at a red light. A family crossed in front of us, a little boy tugging his mother's hand, laughing about something only he understood. I felt a flutter low in my abdomen, subtle but undeniable. I smiled despite myself. "No," I said finally. I think I finally stopped shrinking. Adrian's expression shifted, pride flickering behind his composed exterior. His hand moved from the steering wheel to the center console, palm open, not demanding. I placed my hand in his, and his fingers closed gently around mine, warm and steady. No spectacle, no dramatic claim, just contact. "You are carrying my son," he said quietly. There is nothing diminished about that. The words settled over me differently than Tyler's had. They did not define me. They acknowledged me. I turned slightly toward him. "I did not tell him," I said. "About the baby." Adrian's grip tightened just slightly, not possessive, but resolute. "He is not entitled to that information," he replied. The light turned green. We moved forward. Downtown buildings gave way to broader streets lined with brick townhouses and bare trees. The closer we got to the lake, the quieter the roads became. Adrian's home was not flashy in the way people expected. It was expansive, yes, set back from the street behind iron gates and manicured hedges, but it felt more like a fortress of privacy than a display of wealth. As the gates opened, I felt something inside me settle. Not dependence, not rescue, partnership. The SUV rolled into the driveway, tires crunching softly over gravel. Adrian cut the engine, but did not immediately reach for the door handle. He turned toward me fully this time, green eyes intent. "Emily," he said my name. Low and certain. "You do not owe anyone explanations for becoming stronger." My throat tightened unexpectedly. 6 months ago, strength had meant surviving a breakup. Today, it meant standing in a crowded coffee shop and refusing to feel ashamed. It meant carrying a life inside me and not apologizing for the space it required. Adrian's hand slid gently from mine to rest over my stomach, careful, reverent. "He is already protected," he said. I placed my hand over his, layering our palms together, feeling the quiet promise in the gesture. Outside, the winter wind rustled the trees, but inside the stillness of the parked car, I understood something clearly for the first time. Tyler had tried to make me feel smaller. Adrian did not make me feel owned. He made me feel unafraid. And that changed everything. The house felt quieter than usual that evening, as if even the walls understood that something had shifted. I stepped out of the SUV slowly, one hand braced against the door, the other resting over my stomach, feeling the faint, steady reassurance beneath my palm. Adrian came around immediately, not hovering, just present, his gaze scanning the perimeter out of habit before settling back on me. The front door opened before we reached it. Mrs. Alvarez, who had worked in the house longer than anyone, offered a warm, knowing smile. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, she said softly. Adrian nodded in thanks, his hand hovering near the small of my back as we walked inside. The warmth of the foyer wrapped around us, the faint scent of cedarwood and lemon polish grounding me. I slipped off my coat and handed it to him without thinking. He hung it carefully, smoothing the fabric as if it mattered. Everything he touched, he treated that way. Upstairs, our bedroom overlooked the lake, the gray winter water stretching out like brushed steel under the fading light. I changed into a soft sweater and leggings, catching my reflection in the mirror. The curve of my stomach was undeniable now. Not dramatic, but present, visible. I placed both hands over it and studied myself. Tyler's voice echoed faintly in memory, but it did not sting the way it had earlier. It sounded distant, small. Downstairs, Adrian was on the phone when I reached the living room. His tone was calm, measured, discussing numbers and timelines, something about a shipping contract delayed due to weather in New Jersey. He ended the call the moment he saw me. "Everything handled?" I asked lightly. He inclined his head. "Yes." He did not elaborate, and I did not press. The unspoken understanding between us had grown stronger over the months. He did not shield me from the truth of his world, but he also did not drag me into its shadows. At dinner, the dining room lights cast a soft glow over polished wood and white china. I found myself hungrier than usual, finishing a full plate of roasted chicken, wild rice, and green beans without hesitation. Adrian watched me with quiet satisfaction. "The doctor said you need more protein," he reminded me gently. I smiled. "I am aware." He reached across the table and brushed his thumb lightly over the back of my hand. I am aware too. After dinner, we moved to the sitting room near the fireplace. Snow had started to fall outside, delicate flakes drifting past the tall windows. I curled into the corner of the couch, tucking a blanket around my legs. Adrian sat beside me, close but not crowding, his arm resting along the back cushion behind my shoulders. The fire crackled softly, orange light reflecting in his green eyes. He will talk, Adrian said after a long moment. I knew he meant Tyler. People like him do not let things go quietly. I considered that. I am not afraid of him, I said honestly. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. That does not mean I underestimate him. I shifted closer, resting my head briefly against his shoulder. You do not have to dismantle someone for me to feel protected, I murmured. His hand moved instinctively to my stomach again, fingers spreading carefully, reverently. Protection is not always loud, he replied. The baby moved then, a small, undeniable flutter beneath his palm. Adrian froze, eyes widening slightly in surprise before something softer replaced it. Wonder. He did that, he said quietly, almost to himself. I smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. He does that when you talk. Adrian exhaled slowly, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the man beneath the reputation. He lowered his head slightly, as if listening, as if memorizing the sensation. Outside, the snowfall thickened, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, I realized something that had nothing to do with Tyler or humiliation or public judgment. Strength was not about winning an argument in a coffee shop. It was about sitting in a warm room, in a house that felt safe, with a man who chose presence over control. Adrian did not promise revenge. He promised stability. And as his hand remained steady over our son, I understood that stability was far more powerful than anything Tyler had ever offered. The next morning the snow had settled into a quiet white blanket across the lawn, softening the sharp edges of the iron gates and bare trees beyond them. I woke before sunrise, the sky outside our bedroom window still a deep slate blue, and lay still for a moment with my hand resting over my stomach. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system. Then I felt it again, a small, steady movement beneath my palm, like a reminder that everything had changed and would never return to what it once was. I eased out of bed carefully and padded toward the window, wrapping a robe around myself. The lake in the distance looked frozen in time, still and unbothered by the world's noise. I wondered if peace always felt this fragile before it became permanent. Downstairs, the scent of coffee drifted through the hallway before I reached the kitchen. Adrian was already there, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other scrolling through something on his tablet. He looked up immediately when he heard me. His expression shifted, the sharp business focus softening into something warmer. You should be resting, he said quietly. I gave a small smile. I slept 8 hours. That is more than I have slept in months. He set the tablet aside without hesitation and crossed the room, stopping just short of touching me until I closed the remaining distance myself. His hands settled at my waist, careful, respectful of the life we were protecting together. I have a meeting downtown at 10, he said. I can reschedule if you need anything. The offer was simple, sincere. I shook my head. I have a prenatal appointment this afternoon. Dr. Whitaker said everything looks good. Adrian's jaw relaxed slightly at that. He nodded once, absorbing the information like a man cataloging what mattered most. I will have a driver take you, he said. I hesitated. I can drive myself. His gaze held mine, not dismissing my independence, but measuring risk. I would prefer you not, he replied evenly. Not controlling. Protective. There was a difference, and I recognized it now. I exhaled softly. All right. He pressed a light kiss to my forehead. Nothing rushed, nothing possessive, just reassurance. Later that morning, after he left, I walked slowly through the house, noticing details I had overlooked before. The framed photographs in the hallway. Adrian with community leaders at charity events. Adrian shaking hands with city officials. Adrian standing alone on a construction site, blueprint rolled under one arm, eyes focused on something beyond the camera. The world saw power when they looked at him. I saw discipline. Choice. The doorbell rang just before noon, and my heart skipped despite myself. The security monitor beside the entryway flickered to life. It was not Tyler. It was a delivery driver holding a bouquet of white lilies. I frowned slightly and opened the door only after the security team confirmed his credentials. The card attached was simple. No signature. Just 3 words written in sharp black ink. Congratulations on motherhood. My stomach tightened. The handwriting was familiar. Not Adrian's. Tyler's. I stared at the words for a long moment, the air in the foyer feeling suddenly thinner. He knew. Not officially. Not confirmed. But he suspected. I closed the door slowly and carried the flowers into the kitchen, setting them on the marble counter. They looked innocent. Elegant. Almost thoughtful. I felt neither comforted nor threatened. Just aware. When Adrian returned that evening, I showed him the card without speaking. His expression did not change, but something colder moved behind his eyes. He is fishing, Adrian said quietly, trying to provoke a reaction. I folded my arms, steadying myself. He will not get one. Adrian studied me for a long second, then nodded. Good. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call anyone. He simply took the card from my hand and placed it back on the counter with deliberate calm. Emily, he said, voice low but certain. People who thrive on control struggle when they lose access to it. That is all this is. I looked down at my stomach, then back at him, then let him struggle. Adrian's gaze softened again, the chill disappearing as quickly as it had surfaced. He stepped closer, resting his palm over the gentle curve of our son. He already is, he murmured. And for the first time since the coffee shop, I did not feel judged or exposed. I felt anchored. The lilies remained on the counter, untouched, their white petals open and bright against the marble. But they did not carry power here. Not in this house. Not in this life. Because the truth was simple. Tyler could send flowers. He could send words. But he could not send fear anymore. 3 days later the city felt restless again, the snow already melting into gray slush along the sidewalks. And I realized peace is never the absence of noise but the decision not to let it inside you. I was stepping out of Dr. Whitaker's office, ultrasound photos tucked carefully into my purse, when my phone buzzed with a number I had deleted months ago, yet still recognized instantly. I did not answer. I stood there in the parking lot for a full 10 seconds, watching other patients walk toward their cars, ordinary lives unfolding around me, before the voicemail notification appeared. I slid into the back seat of the car Adrian had insisted on sending and pressed play. Tyler's voice filled the quiet interior, smooth but edged with something brittle. Emily, I think we need to talk. I heard some interesting things. Call me. No anger. No accusation. Just entitlement wrapped in false calm. I ended the message and stared at the dark screen. The driver met my eyes briefly in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. When we pulled through the gates later that afternoon, Adrian was already home, which meant he had rearranged his schedule. He was standing near the entryway when I walked in, coat still on, as if he had been waiting. His gaze dropped immediately to my face, searching. Appointment, he asked quietly. I pulled the ultrasound images from my purse and handed them to him without a word. For a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without blinking, his hands were unexpectedly careful as he studied the black and white print. The faint outline of a profile. The curve of a tiny spine. He is growing, Adrian murmured, almost to himself. Yes, I replied softly. Then I told him about the voicemail. I watched the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared not in aggression but in calculation. He is attempting to insert himself, Adrian said evenly. He suspects. I nodded. He does not know for certain. Adrian set the ultrasound photos down gently on the console table and stepped closer. Does he matter? He asked. The question surprised me. Not because I did not know the answer, but because he wanted to hear it from me. I thought about the coffee shop, the lilies, the voicemail. I thought about the version of myself who once waited for Tyler's approval like it was oxygen. No, I said firmly. Adrian held my gaze for a long second, confirming the truth in it. Then we proceed as planned. That evening we hosted a small dinner, nothing extravagant, just 2 business associates and their wives. I wore a navy maternity dress that skimmed over my stomach instead of hiding it. For the first time, I did not choose something loose to avoid commentary. I chose something that acknowledged reality. The women complimented the glow in my skin. One of them asked how far along I was. 24 weeks. I answered with quiet confidence. Adrian's hand found the small of my back as he spoke with his guests. Not possessive, simply present. Word traveled fast in this city. I knew by the subtle change in tone when one of the associates mentioned hearing congratulations from mutual contacts. Tyler would hear too. But this time, the narrative would not be shaped by him. Later, after the guests left and the staff cleared the dishes, I stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, palms resting against the cool marble counter. Adrian joined me silently, sliding an arm around my waist from behind, his chin resting lightly near my temple. "Are you tired?" he asked. "No," I answered honestly. "I am certain." He turned me gently so that I faced him fully. "Certainty is stronger than fear," he said. I looked up at him, remembering the way Tyler once measured me by inches and pounds in compliance. Adrian measured me by resolve. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling bare branches against the windows. Inside, the house remained steady. My phone buzzed again on the counter. A text this time. "Tyler." I did not open it. I slid the device across the marble toward Adrian, not as a request for rescue, but as a declaration that it no longer controlled me. He did not pick it up immediately. Instead, he took my hands in his, lifting them gently to rest between us. "You are not alone in this," he said quietly. I believed him, not because he promised to silence the world, but because he stood beside me while it spoke. And as our sun shifted beneath my heart, I realized something undeniable. Tyler could reach out. He could speculate. He could attempt to reclaim relevance. But he could not compete with the life growing inside me, or the man who chose to protect it without ever asking me to shrink. It happened on a Thursday morning when the sky over Chicago looked washed out and heavy, the kind of gray that presses low against the skyline like it is waiting for something to break. I was seated at the small writing desk in our bedroom, sorting through thank you notes from the dinner earlier in the week, when my phone vibrated again. I had silenced Tyler's number, but unknown numbers still slipped through. This time it was not a message. It was a photo. No words attached. Just an image of the coffee shop where everything had shifted, taken from outside through the glass. The timestamp read 10 minutes earlier. I stared at it, my reflection faintly visible in the dark screen as I absorbed what it meant. He was not asking questions anymore. He was watching. A slow breath filled my lungs, steady, deliberate. Fear tried to rise, but it did not settle the way it once would have. Instead, something colder formed in its place. Clarity. I walked downstairs without rushing, the phone resting loosely in my hand. Adrian was in his office, door partially open, speaking in low measured tones about a development project near the river. He looked up the moment I appeared in the doorway. Whatever he saw in my expression ended the call instantly. "What is it?" he asked, already standing. I handed him the phone. He studied the image in silence, his thumb still against the edge of the screen. No immediate reaction. No flash of anger. Just assessment. "He is escalating," Adrian said quietly. I crossed my arms over my stomach, protective without thinking. "He wants a reaction." Adrian nodded once. "And he will not receive one." He did not ask for the phone again. He did not call anyone in my presence. He stepped closer instead, placing one hand gently over mine where it rested on our son. "Are you frightened?" he asked. The question was careful, not dismissive. I considered it honestly. "No," I said after a moment. "I am finished being frightened." Adrian's jaw tightened subtly, but his eyes held mine, searching for doubt. Finding none. "Then we shift the narrative," he said evenly. That afternoon, I left the house with full awareness of the cameras along the gates and the security team positioned discreetly beyond view. Not because I needed protection from violence, but because I needed protection from intrusion. The difference mattered. I went downtown, not to hide, but to be visible. I met with the director of a local women's foundation Adrian had quietly funded for years. We discussed prenatal health initiatives and expanding counseling services for women leaving controlling relationships. I spoke clearly, confidently. When someone asked about my pregnancy, I answered without hesitation. "I am 25 weeks," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "And I am grateful." By evening, photos from the meeting had already begun circulating online. Nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic, just me standing beside other women, one hand resting naturally over my stomach. Tyler did not own the story anymore. Back at the house, Adrian watched the coverage scroll across his tablet, expression unreadable but steady. "Visibility changes leverage," he said quietly. I understood what he meant. Silence allows speculation to grow. Presence dissolves it. My phone remained quiet that night. No new photos. No new messages. Instead, an email arrived from a mutual acquaintance of Tyler's, polite but distant, informing me that Tyler had taken a leave from his firm due to personal reasons. I did not ask questions. I did not celebrate. I simply exhaled. Adrian joined me on the balcony outside our bedroom later that evening, the city lights stretching out below like scattered stars. His hand slid around my waist, firm and grounding. "Control is a fragile thing," he murmured. I leaned back against his chest, watching the faint movement beneath my sweater as our sun shifted again. "So is ego," I replied softly. Adrian's fingers tightened slightly, not in restraint, but in recognition. "You chose to stand," he said. "That is why he is unsteady." The wind brushed cool against my cheeks, but I did not feel exposed. I felt anchored. Tyler had tried to reduce me to a comment in a crowded room. Now the world saw something different. Not a woman diminished. A woman expanding. An expansion, I had learned, is impossible to shame. The headlines shifted quietly the following week, not dramatic enough to trend, but noticeable if you were paying attention. A local finance blog mentioned restructuring at Tyler's firm. A networking event guest list circulated without his name on it. Subtle omissions. Quiet withdrawals. I did not ask Adrian if he had moved any pieces. I did not need to. Influence does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply adjusts the temperature of a room until someone realizes they are no longer comfortable. I was in the nursery when the call finally came. The room still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedar from the new crib Adrian had insisted on assembling himself despite the staff offering. Pale gray walls. White trim. A rocking chair positioned near the window overlooking the lake. I was folding small cotton onesies when my phone lit up with Tyler's name again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Emily," he began, and for the first time, his voice did not sound smooth. It sounded tired. "We need to clear the air." I remained seated, one hand instinctively resting over my stomach. "There is no air to clear," I replied evenly. A pause stretched between us. "I know," he said finally. The admission seemed to cost him something. I handled things poorly. I did not rush to fill the silence with reassurance. He had once thrived on my need to smooth over tension. "You tried to embarrass me," I said calmly. "You underestimated me." Another pause. Longer this time. "I did not know," he added quietly. He did not specify what he did not know. The pregnancy. Adrian. The version of me that no longer waited for validation. It did not matter. "You did not ask," I said. "You assumed." I could almost hear him swallow. "I heard about the foundation event," he continued. "And the baby." There it was. Confirmation. Not accusation. Just reality catching up. I glanced around the nursery, at the sunlight filtering softly through sheer curtains, at the crib that would soon hold a life bigger than any past relationship. "Yes," I said simply. "I am having a son." The words felt solid, unshakable. "Is it his?" The question came out brittle, stripped of its former arrogance. I allowed myself a small breath before answering. "Yes." Silence flooded the line. Not anger. Not disbelief. Just understanding. "I thought you would come back," he admitted quietly. "You always did." The truth of that might have hurt once. Now it felt like a lesson learned. "I do not return to places that shrink me," I said. "I am not the same woman you dated." He exhaled slowly. "I can see that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between who we had been and who we were now stretched wide and undeniable. "I am sorry," he said at last. The apology was not grand. It was not eloquent. It was simple. I considered it carefully. "I accept that you are sorry," I replied. "But I do not need anything from you." When I ended the call, my hands were steady. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. Adrian appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, his expression questioning but calm. "It is done," I told him. He stepped inside, gaze sweeping the nursery, lingering on the crib, then settling on me. He called. I nodded. Adrian moved closer, placing his palm gently over my stomach, grounding both of us in what truly mattered. "And?" he asked. "He understands now," I said softly. Adrian's jaw eased slightly, tension dissolving into something quieter. "Understanding is not power," he murmured. "No," I agreed. "Growth is." Outside the window, the lake shimmered under afternoon light, no longer steel gray but touched with silver. The world had not changed overnight. There were no dramatic confrontations, no raised voices echoing through crowded rooms. There was only this steady unfolding. Tyler had tried to reduce me to a comment. Now he was a footnote. And as Adrian's hand remained warm and certain over our son, I understood the final truth. The greatest reversal was not humiliation answered with dominance. It was dismissal answered with peace. By the time spring began to soften the edges of the city, I had stopped measuring time in weeks of pregnancy and started measuring it in heartbeats. 32 weeks. That was what Dr. Whitaker said at my last appointment, her voice warm as she printed another grainy ultrasound image for us to take home. 32 weeks of becoming someone new. The lake outside our bedroom window no longer looked steel gray. It shimmered, blue under longer afternoons, sunlight lingering past 7 in the evening. Adrian stood beside me most nights now, one hand resting over my stomach as if he could memorize every movement before our son arrived. He did not speak about Tyler anymore. There was nothing left to discuss. Silence had replaced tension, and silence felt earned. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a small charity luncheon at a renovated art gallery downtown, bright white walls lined with local photography. I wore a soft cream dress that fit my body without apology, the curve of my stomach unmistakable. Adrian walked beside me, steady and composed, his hand occasionally brushing against mine, never gripping, never claiming, simply present. Conversations paused when we entered, not in scandal, but in recognition. People smiled. They congratulated. They asked about names and nursery colors and due dates. No one mentioned the coffee shop. No one repeated the comment that had once echoed too loudly in my head. Narratives shift when you refuse to repeat them. Midway through the event, I noticed Tyler across the room. Not close, not approaching, just standing near a sculpture display, hands in his pockets, watching from a distance. He looked different somehow, not diminished, just aware. Our eyes met briefly. There was no smirk, no attempt to provoke. He inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement without intrusion. I returned the gesture. That was all. Adrian felt the shift in my posture beside him and followed my line of sight. He saw Tyler immediately. I felt the subtle change in his stance, protective instinct rising without effort. I touched his arm lightly before he could move. "It is fine," I said quietly. Adrian looked down at me, searching my expression for doubt. Finding none, he nodded once. "As long as you are certain," he replied. "I am," I said. Tyler did not approach. He did not speak. A few minutes later, he left through the side exit without disrupting the room. The door closed behind him softly, without spectacle. I released a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Not from fear, from closure. Adrian's hand slid to my stomach again, warm and grounding. "He understands," Adrian murmured. "Yes," I agreed. "But more importantly, I do." Later that evening, back at the house, we stood together in the nursery as twilight settled over the lake. The crib was ready. The small dresser stocked with folded blankets and tiny socks. I ran my fingers along the smooth wooden railing, imagining the weight of our son in my arms. "Do you regret any of it?" Adrian asked quietly behind me. The question was unexpected, honest. I thought about the coffee shop, the humiliation, the flowers, the messages, the phone call. "No," I said after a moment. If he had not tried to make me feel small, I might not have realized how much space I deserved. Adrian stepped closer, wrapping his arms carefully around me from behind, his chin resting lightly near my temple. "You were never small," he said softly. I smiled, feeling our son shift in response to his voice. "Maybe not," I replied. But I had to learn that for myself. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic lights changed. Boats began returning to the water. Seasons shifted without asking permission. Inside the quiet room, I understood the final lesson completely. Strength is not proven by who stands beside you when you are mocked. It is proven by who you become after. Tyler once believed he could measure my worth in pounds and approval. Adrian measured it in resilience. But the truth was simpler than either of them. I was never defined by a comment in a crowded room. I was defined by the life growing beneath my heart and the certainty that I no longer needed anyone's permission to take up space.